We were on Matthew 24, verse 29, so I just want to recap. This Bible text is talking about the dark day that occurred on May 19, 1780, when there was a total eclipse of the sun, and the moon was blood that afterwards, and then where it talks about the stars falling from heaven, that was in 1833, and the powers of heaven shaken. When did that happen? Well, come to find out, that actually was a prophetic event that occurred on August 11, 1840, called the Second Woe of Islam. You could refer to studies on Revelation 9 for further information. So this was beginning the time prophecies that started in 1789, going through August 10 of 1840, and going through some other prophecies. So let's talk about that. Then in verse 30 of Matthew 40, it says, "And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." So when did this happen? Well, first off, it does refer to Jesus' second coming, so you need to watch the language as it moves back and forth, and I have some Bible texts there in the handout that refer to that. But also, there was a sign of the Son of Man, because during this time in history, there was a group called the Millerites, and they were studying prophecy, and they were studying all through these dates here, and they came to something called the Midnight Cry, which was around April 19 of 1844, and came to another day called October 22, 1844. This was a day that they thought Jesus was returning to earth, and only the righteous would be saved. But it actually was, they found out that after going through this great disappointment and finding out he didn't come that day, that really this was a day foretold in the Bible, having to do with him changing his ministry from the holy place in the sanctuary to the most holy place, and that's a whole nother study. And then after that were some important events around the Civil War. So let's go to Matthew 24, verse 31. It says, "And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." What does this mean? Well, there's a lot of other studies chained into this that we could link in and study, so I'm just going to briefly mention. But this actually referred to some events in Revelation 18, verses 1 through 4, the events that I believe happened at 9/11. So we have two prophetic patterns that parallel each other. And these are the prophetic patterns that I also find in the book of Joel. One has to do with 1798 going to October 22, 1844, and the time actually of the Civil War afterwards, and then the time from 1989, 9/11, and going through to the end of the world when Jesus comes. That's what we're studying. That's what we're studying in Joel. Some of you are probably thinking, well, where do I get all the information for this to tie it into all these events? Remember, this study is just to help you get a flavor of what it's like studying Bible prophecy. I'm keeping focused on days versus years and what that means in studying the book of Joel. So bear with me, and I also will provide other Bible studies that just send me questions, and I'll answer them. I'll provide the information I have so you can study it. So let's look at Matthew 24, verses 36 through 39. "But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only." Even in the Millerite time, they didn't understand this part, because they thought that on October 22, 1844, that Jesus was coming to the earth, and they didn't understand that it was a sanctuary in heaven. Okay, so days versus years is a really important thing to understand. So just remember that part of it. Okay, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels in heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were before the flood, and they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. And so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. And so this is talking about the time of the flood and Noah, but it has prophetic significance for the Millerite time and also for our time. So, they were doing this, partying, licentious behavior, cruelty to each other. This was a very bad time in the U.S. history. Those who owned slaves, how they treated the slaves, all kinds of injustices and crimes against humanity were committed during this time. And then afterwards, during the time, the 19 years from October 22, 1844 to 1863, when the Civil War started, you know, that kind of behavior just got worse. Okay, so here we are in our time, and we're studying these patterns, and I'm suggesting that these are the patterns that Joel is asking us to study in the book of Joel. And in our time, what's happening now, how people are treated, the injustices in the world, the crimes against humanity and different races, some of it based on racial stuff, and some of it based on who has money and who doesn't, and just, it's not good. It's not good. Okay, we want to remember we're focusing on Jesus coming, right? Okay, so that's how it was during the flood, time of the flood, and that's how it was in the Millerite time, and that's how it is in our time. Okay, Matthew 24, verse 50. The Lord of that servant shall come in a day when he looketh not for him, and in an hour that he is not aware of. A lot of people are saying, yeah, you know, we don't believe the Bible. Jesus isn't going to come, you know, on a day and an hour that we're not aware of. We're not studying prophecy. He's going to come. So let's move to Matthew 9, verse 15. And Jesus said unto them, Can the children of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then shall they fast. Now this was referring to a bitter disappointment that his disciples went through when they were not thinking he was going to the cross, even though he had prophesied that, and they were thinking he would be king, and they went through a bitter disappointment. But when it's talking about days here, it's meaning more than one time. So it was also talking about Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13, and Mark 2, verses 19 through 22, where Jesus gave the parable of the bridegroom and the virgins. So this is an important parable to study in connection with all of this. Okay? And remember, we just read the verse about people who are saying, oh, he's not going to come, you know, in a day when he's only going to, and he's not going to come, and so then Jesus comes in a day and an hour that the person's not aware of and not looking for him and not ready. So that brings us back to Joel. What I've been doing is weaving all these things about Joel with days versus years, trying to get you to understand that there is a weaving, and there's a way we have to understand and read it carefully, because we don't want to be off track in how we're understanding the Bible. So I'm coming to Joel 1, verse 2. Hear this, ye old men, and give ear, all ye inhabitants of the land. Hath this been in your days, or even in the days of your fathers? Now your days, in this, I believe, is the time of the latter days. that we've linked it through from Genesis through Daniel through Matthew 24. I've chained references in the Bible. It's in the margin of my Bible with all of these topics. So I believe that that's the time from 1989, the events that occurred then with 9/11, something called the Midnight Cry, close of probation, which is when everyone's made up their mind whether they want salvation or not, and when Jesus comes. The days of your fathers, what does that mean? I believe that it means the Millerite time, that it's important to study this time from 1798 to 1844. Now, let's come to Joel 1:3. Tell ye your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. This is 4 generations. It includes our time. It includes the days of our parents, our grandparents. Actually, it's from the time, I believe, from 1844, October 22, 1844, going through what all happened, understanding what happened from the Civil War, building up, clear through our time, understanding that. And it involves intergenerational work that we're doing to heal and to understand a lot of things. I'm not going to get into that further right now. So I believe that days and years in Joel 1 verse 2 is calling us to correctly understand which periods in prophecy we are to study, specifically calling us to study the events that occurred during the Millerite time from 1798 to October 22, 1844, and the events of the last days in our time from 1989 to the end of the world. I believe the 4 generations in Joel, verse 1-3, cause us to study the time period of the 4 generations, and that this began from October 22, 1844, goes to the end of the world. I also believe, we'll see if I get this in here before it shuts off, that the 2 different patterns found in the insects in Joel 1, verse 4, and Joel 2, verse 25, are calling us to these same prophetic patterns here. These are calling us to understand specifically the events that occurred during the Millerite time and from 1989 to the end of the world. These times are called the 7 thunders. That's a whole nother study. It's found in the Bible in Revelation 10 verses 1-4. I look forward to doing some more taping and hearing your comments and seeing how helpful this was. Like I say, message me. If you're in the groups I do at the Awaken website, Facebook site, let me know. I'll post more studies. Thank you very much. Bye.